This is a conversation with Mckie, CEO and founding partner at Amendum Capital, developer, writer, advisor, educator, and someone who's been involved in the crypto space as early as 2013. This episode is sponsored by me. Please leave a review on the podcast and go to newsletter.joshterryplays.com. As a disclaimer, this is not financial advice. Do your own research. Let's start with what's your background and what made Steven want to become a developer?
Yeah, so it's I like to think of myself as more of a full stack person than to use one in particular description for what I am. Developer, yes. Financier, sure. Investor, definitely. Writer, editor in chief, sometimes. Mentor, often. Really, it depends. And the reason why I guess I garnered that general skill set is, myself came from a very, very impoverished family. Grew up in the 90s. I might not look it, but I'm 30. I've always been fascinated with computers. I'm a high functioning autist. But back in my day in the 90s and 2000s, people didn't know what autism was. They just thought you were a little bit weird. And my dad, he thought I might be a little bit weird and then I also might be gay, which was funny. And I was like, no, Dad, I just really like to stick to myself, read books, and be on the computer all day. And I remember when we got our first computer, it must have been 1998, 1999. It was this all-in-one gateway computer. Some of them had cow prints on them, but ours just was all white. My dad had rented it from Rentway because my dad was a drug dealer. He wanted to seem cool. Computers were cool at the time, so he rented a computer from Rent-A-Center and brought it into the house. And I had been playing with computers in elementary school. They started us very early. I lived in Icann County, South Carolina. I was born in Georgia though, and it was in a very, very white majority, very wealthy kind of area code. So we were in a school where we all got computers very early, and they started teaching us on them very, very early, actually, in hindsight. And so, I had a computer at home. I started going around, cartoonnetwork.com, nickelodeon.com. I want to play video games. I'm going to, our AOL, subscription ran out. Let me go run up the street and find someone else's disc in their mailbox so I could go reinstall American Online so that I could get back on the internet. And when that trial was up, because my mom was an ex-felon, my dad might not have been ever caught, but maybe should have been. And so she didn't really have any credit. She didn't have a bank account. There was no thing as a debit card, or so you can sign up for something monthly, and then the family would never commit to monthly. To this day, I still don't like monthly recurring payments, even though I can afford it because I grew up so far removed from that world. And so I spent so much time on the computer, deleting things that I shouldn't delete, breaking the computer multiple times, having to reinstall the operating system, else my dad's going to get pissed at me, and figuring this all out when I'm 9 or 10 years old. Right. So I'm on a computer all the time because it was something to do. I lived in the middle of the country. We lived in a trailer in the woods. It's Georgia, South Carolina. So it's either go out, play the hot and humidity, or sit inside in the cold AC. I'm a nerd. I opted for the latter often. And also for a while, I also had a typical nerd. I also had asthma, so I would be wheezy. So I didn't really want to play a lot of sports. I grew out of that eventually. But so that became a life of isolation, really, in hindsight, where I was just always in my head and always online. And so with that, I played around this website called beyond.com, which was the very first time I ever used digital money. BYOND.com, it still exists. And they had this digital currency. You could load up mom and dad's credit card, debit card at the time, and buy these things called dimes, which were 1-for-1 dollar equivalents that you would buy, and basically digital Chuck E. Cheese tokens. And I didn't have the means to buy them. So what I did was I hung around in these different game environments where you would make these different 16-bit sprites, and you create these huge infinite worlds, right? Manifesting your own world. You would learn programming, you would learn graphic visual arts everyone that's building NFTs today, but you would build little 16-bit sprites and stuff, and then you would deploy that in the code, and all your friends would play these games. And in game you would trade dimes for this stuff. So I must have been 11 or 12 at the time. And I love that shit. I love Dragon Ball Z. I played a game called Dragon Ball Gekkosen on there, which really got me into it. And there was a programmer on there. His name was Master Dan. And that was his pseudonym. And that's when I entered the world of also just online identity pseudonyms. There was you who existed online as a person, and there was Stephen Mckie, who existed online, and no one knew that I was just this little brown boy living in the woods. But everyone wanted to talk to me, so that was nice. And so I would say fast forward to like college. That was about like 22, like about November of 2012. One of my buddies who was going to Howard University, who was in the med school program, he was like, yeah, man, I smoke weed sometimes. I'm like, yeah, I've tried some weed. I don't really smoke it like that. And he's like, well, I bought some on the dark web. And I was like, well, what is this dark web? It's the word web, which I'm already intrigued, but you put the word dark in front of it, and I've got to know what that is. This is this place. You download this browser and you go on this thing, and you see shit you don't normally see on the internet. And I was like, say less. So I got on this thing, went on the site, never bought any drugs. And I'm not saying that for my own sake. I just didn't, because I just wasn't into drugs like that. But at the time, and I was like, I'm not gonna buy any this stuff. But I'm just gonna peruse and go to the deep, seedy corners of what the internet had to offer. And I found some shit that made me uncomfortable. Whether or not it was real or not, I don't know. But I found some stuff where I was like, wow, people are really evil on the internet. But fast forward, going into like 2013, I started getting more heavily involved into like crypto. This was like when the altcoin scenes, back when we called things altcoins, were like popping up. You learn about Bitcoin, but before we had really understood what Bitcoin was and its grand importance and kind of like it being a first mover and its general technical construction and why it was so interesting, other people tried to spin off their own. Myself, I was never in the market to build my own cryptocurrency. I was more so in the market of like maybe making some money like I had on all these other games and shit I had played in the past, right? So I was just looking for a hustle really while I was in college to like make some money. And I wasn't selling drugs. So I was like, let me see if I can just make some Bitcoin, like helping. So I had this little news publication that I started in college because I did like a front end development sort of like internship thing for this company called altdaily.com, which might still exist. And I was helping them with their site. So I was like, oh, they're just spinning up a WordPress front end and stuff. And they're just like these three, chicks in the small office, and they're like working this like local beat, and like they're like working on stuff. I was like, why can't I do that with like some crypto, something about crypto or technical stuff? Like I hang out all day on Engadget, Gizmodo. Started this site called /gadgets and .com. And if you go far enough in a Wayback Machine, you'll probably find some of my content. But yeah, so I started it. I wrote my first article about Bitcoin on there. And actually my very first article about Bitcoin was like, Bitcoin is a digital currency, but what comes after it? That was my first intrigue when I heard about Bitcoin. I was like, this is cool, proof of work, and it's like money. But I spent so much time online, and I was like, we can do a lot more with this. And this was and then 2013, 2014 rolled around where Vitalik was talking about like proof of stake. I actually worked on another currency called Blackcoin, and I helped them do their POS V2, proof of stake V2 white paper. And so Blackcoin was the first attempt at a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake system, wherein Sonny King had invented Peercoin, which was the first like proof of stake implementation. And then other people sought to, well, how do we remove the aspects of like coinage? How do we remove the risk of the nothing at stake attack? Basically, it's like you've got all these assets that you got that were worth like nothing. Now they're worth something, and they're using it to generate more free assets that are worth something. I got all this money for free. I have no reason, once I'm tired of it, I can just destroy it. I have nothing at stake, but it's all staking. And so how do you tweak the little consensus related elements of that to like make that viable? So experiment with the proof of work hybrid, garner a solid distribution, trying, remove from a bell curve distribution, you want to move to a, power distribution. Get those individuals in line, then switch to proof of stake. All this happened over like a week and a half, 2 weeks. Like not like Ethereum today where we did like 6-7 years of a hard proof of work phase and now slowly moving into proof of stake. Like we were like, let's just do it in 2 weeks. And so did that. Help them author that paper. You can also look up like Blackcoin POS V2 paper on Google. You'll pop up. You'll see my name in there somewhere. But that was also like interesting to me because it was like finding like-minded people, building a community around it. Okay, miners are really interested in this. Okay, now they're not. Okay, now the miners are buying a bunch of the asset, and since we switched it from proof of work to proof of stake, they're mad at us. Now they're using all their free assets to dump us in perpetuity on an exchange. It also taught me the game theory around why mining was important, and then it also understood like what do you need for a good proof version of like proof of stake. Fast forward, I did all sorts of cool shit. did a whole bunch of writing, did a whole bunch of consulting, worked for a company called BitReserve, which is now called Uphold, helped start this thing called Yours Network, yours.org, which was the first like Bitcoin micropayment implementation for a Reddit-like system. And at the time, Ryan X. Charles was working on Reddit for that, quit as the first lead engineer for that, started working on Yours. I hopped on board as like kind of like product manager, so to speak, helping them sort of like speak to the people, marketing, product version of this technology that I understood very well. I had played with it, I had tinkered with it, I had researched on it, like I thought about it for a long time. So that was where I had always found my interest. The intersection of development, business, finance, proof of work, the community, because that's everything that I knew I had ever learned on the internet now being applicable to one thing that could make me money. Something in me intuitively said, keep doing this and you're on the right track. So, you know, I worked at Purse IO, which is like a huge marketplace that's like designated for Bitcoin as of now still, I believe. And, you know, earning Bitcoin strictly as my paycheck. I'd moved to San Francisco. They're like, would you like to get paid in Bitcoin? I was like, great, of course I would like to get paid in Bitcoin. And that was in like 2015, 2016. Wow. So, you know, I was like, and I had been there for the launch of Ethereum. I'd been there for the launch of Zcash. I helped with Zcash's governance, had discussions with Zuko and Nathan Wilcox of Zcash. I had done plenty of talks and workshops and technical programming related ones and social ones and educational ones at ETH Denver, different Ethereum conferences, different Bitcoin conferences, helped manage different Bitcoin conferences, helped manage some Ethereum conferences on my own. I had seen everything when it came to building an ecosystem, like touching it myself, building it myself, and managing technical teams too. And so when it came time for me to leave Purse and start my fund, Amentum, I knew that I had all the skills to look directly into the community, see what was viable based on my years of historical experience. I had the referent power and historical the historical basis for which people could say, yeah, I would give this guy some money to manage it. Yeah, he seems like he knows what he's doing. You know, so I was like, cool, I'm going to take this network effect that I have. I'm going to take the social capital that I've accrued. I'm going to get outside capital, which I've never had. And then I'm going to use that to apply my skill set and then make people money. And that's how, and essentially, there's been a lot of things that have happened since then. That was 2017, 2018. But essentially, that's how I evolved from being a, you know, developer, product, business nerd to working in crypto. And during that whole time, too, I went to college. I got my degree. I studied CS and information systems, ended up graduating with my BA in information systems technology from Old Dominion University. It was really dope. I also did like 2-ish and some change years of like just raw CS before I was like, I always thought to myself as a master generalist, not a jack of all trades. I find wells and I get really deep with them where I get just enough skills where it benefits me for my next well and I go down, right? And so it's like, I really believe that humans shouldn't specialize. Like that's for insects. Like humans should be generalized, but they should be competent enough to not sound like a jackass. So it's like cool, brown kid, came from nothing, came somewhere, tried to be something, found his family in the thing that he loved doing the most, just being on the internet, and then like then it's just finding other people who fit that bill and giving them money and saving them time by teaching them the things that I had already learned years back. Hopefully, and I'm sorry that was a long introduction, but I feel like that's as keenly as I can like put it so people understand that like don't put me in a box. I'm not one thing. I'm whatever needs to get done.
That was epic. I love it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
When you mentioned discovering Bitcoin, you talked about thinking about what's next. Yeah. A really similar thing happened to me the first time crypto in general was explained to me. One of my first thoughts was, oh my God, what happens when the stock market is inside of it? That was like a really early thought for me. It was like, okay, here's the thing that's like outside of the current world structure. What happens when it is the world structure and we're inside of it? You know, it's mind-boggling.
My lawyer said it best once on a phone call. I think it's like 2017, 2018. and he was just like sat there, and like he find like such a sharp dude, Alexander Lindgren. But this was like the day he got it, and he was just like, holy shit, you guys have built a shadow financial system on the backs of the existing bank accounts, and no one noticed. And I was like, oh yeah, I was like, oh, they noticed. I was like, they noticed. The smart one noticed. But like, yeah, you got it. Basically, yeah, shadow fiscal financial system. Yeah, that it's just there now, and you can't cut it off. He's like, oh man. I just like, I normally don't do this, but I feel like I should buy some Bitcoin. And I'm like, yeah, man, like maybe you should buy it. Like, I'm glad that light bulb like finally, like went off. But I think there's a moment that has to happen for a lot of people. They're like, oh, cool, digital money. Oh, peer-to-peer, digital gold, cool. And they're like, oh, fuck, but wait, what if this is the backbone of everything? And that's when you're like, well, that'll probably happen. And it was that moment that happened to me years back where I was like, everything could be built on this. But I had a technical enough understanding and garnered at that point through like university, my personal, hands-on experience, that I was like, Bitcoin won't just be that. And it was seeing Ethereum come along where it's like, yeah, Ethereum will maybe be that, but it's still not that. And then getting even more deeper as I learned more about networks, distributed consensus, etc., I realized even Ethereum can't do that. And even if you wanted to tightly couple, which means that any software service and or piece of contract you meet is now completely dependent on Ethereum, making all its contract calls, like looking for additional information from other contracts, tightly coupled to it, versus it being loosely coupled, which in this system is self-sustaining, this system is self-sustaining. If in which I need to borrow your use case, I just reach out and make a state contract. I make a smart contract where I can borrow that state, know that that state is canonical, know that that state is anchored and it is being maintained by consensus, reference it as a pointer, and then utilize that. Think of it as the blockchains themselves as the oracles of the information. And then each of these different blockchains eventually forms a different piece of the variable stack, which eventually replicates the existing internet. You have to, one, understand Bitcoin, two, understand the limitations of smart contracts and what they're for, and then three, understand how the internet works before you actually know what all the pieces. So you need something that will transmit information and data and value like Bitcoin. You need something to assure it in transit like Ethereum and its smart contracts. You need to have a pointer as to where that money goes. You need to append it, so whether it's some address, some decentralized identifier, and you need to store it. So you need to have some form of decentralized storage, right? So that's very similar to like posting, putting, and like sending information over an API. You are now like using the blockchains as those substrates in order to like move and malleate like that data. It's a lot to get, and you have to be really generalized and also multidisciplinary to come to that conclusion. Because if you just come in as a financier and you look at Bitcoin as it's a digital gold, it's a stock, it's gonna go up, I'm gonna buy it. And you might come in as like a normal developer on Ethereum and be like, oh, contract calls, write little programs, microservices that reach out to each other. And like, now I don't need to worry about all that excess overhead. I just use the Ethereum chain. Cool. But you might come along and say, well, I need a naming service. I need to have some decentralized storage. Where the hell am I going to store my backend information for my Ethereum apps? Where am I going to store the front end, for my Ethereum apps? Like, I don't want to use the normal DNS. That's centralized. I don't want to use AWS. Like, that's centralized. Like, why am I building all these decentralized things that have these centralized dependencies? Maybe we should decentralize those dependencies, right? So it took a while for the space to, and this is called like emergent evolution. It took a while for the space to realize this is what we got, this is what we're good at, this is what we suck at, and this is what we need. And between here and there has been a lot of maximalism, which is we think we can do it all. But mostly that translates, and when I hear that communicate to me, is I don't understand how anything works.
Does usefulness define value, or does usefulness determine value?
I'd say usefulness is dependent upon its sustainability as to whether or not it can endure value, right? So like the concept of money is like durable, it's fungible, right? Like all the aspects that create moneyness, right? You have to take those into account. And the reason why is because you want something that, because people value things in many different ways. A great example is a handshake name, which I'm sure we'll get into a discussion with later, or a NFT, a non-fungible, token that's just like a piece of artwork. you know that non-fungible token is just like a little ERC 721 contract with a little bit of metadata pegged into it. But for some reason, this one is worth $10 and this one's worth $7 million. Like that doesn't make any sense. And it's because humans value things in different ways. And so you would seek to recreate technologically those different means of like value accrual into a substrate that can talk to a blockchain. And that's kind of the name of the game.
Okay, so you're talking about the value of the item on the blockchain.
Yeah, so you need to, if you value something intrinsically, you need a schema as to which to create that an extrinsic version of that value, right? I.e., oh, here is this digital signature that points and signs that I own this NFT. But then where is the extrinsic value? Can I see the digital item? Where's that digital item being stored? So it's a picture, it's a video, it's a GIF. Is it decentralized? Can I always reach that item? And can it be deleted? And now all I'm left is this digital signature, right? So value is intrinsic and extrinsic, and it is sustainable when you find the convergence of the two.
Yes. My concerns with the maximalism, besides the fact that it sounds perfect and that frightens me, is I feel that it doesn't take into account the infinite nature of human desire. So, I mean, I'm very sold on Bitcoin. It's the if it's not the majority of my holdings currently, it's getting close to it. But at the same time, like, going further into the space, to me it's doing well as what it was designed to do. You know, the store of value. It's I don't know if that was what it was designed for, but that's the narrative, right? It's doing well for its foundational offering of value to the world. But humans have infinite desire. So let's say Bitcoin wins and it's perfect and it does all the things that Bitcoin is supposed to do. As soon as that has happened, we're going to ask the question, what's next? Like, at humanity, people are going to naturally ask the question, what's next? So for that reason, I'm not as like I actually am very drawn to a lot of the maximalist arguments. They resonate, you know, with my logical desires and all of that. But at the same time, I'm very one, I'm an artist, right? so I'm naturally like open personality, and I want to try other things. So, you know, if I were to get stuck on just Bitcoin, I would go a little bit crazy because I have to try new things. But also because of that infinite desire of humanity for new experiences, new developments. I feel like even if all of the things about Bitcoin were to come true that people consider might happen, I think there's still more beyond it.
Yes, absolutely, right. And you said an interesting thing. It's like, if Bitcoin did everything that everyone wanted to do, what else would there be left for it to do? And so, kind of think you have to understand like scarcity. So I just talked about intrinsic and extrinsic value, but again, that's all subjective. There's no such thing as an objective view of value. Value is peer-to-peer, right? For instance, I could create the Bitcoin blockchain, live on planet Earth, run one node, mine Bitcoin, own all the Bitcoin, but am I rich?
Oh, could you expand on that? Yeah,
I wouldn't.
Value is, you said value is peer-to-peer, as in like it's subjective, and it depends on the relationship between the individuals to determine that value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for instance, right. So I say I'm the king of the world. I'm the only person on the globe, and I own Bitcoin. Does Bitcoin change anything? No. Do people care about that? No. Can I exchange that for goods? No. You need people to rule. So it's funny, right? To create money and value, you need people to rule over. Or rather, a better way to say it, you need people to observe that subjective state of mind. So if I say one Bitcoin is worth, or 10,000 Bitcoins is worth a Papa John's pizza, like with Laszlo, who did one of the first Bitcoin purchases, and then 10,000 people see me buy that pizza, I now know that 10,000 Bitcoin is worth at least a Papa John's pizza. So now subjectively, intrinsically, I value 10,000 Bitcoin and then the next time I go to an order book, when I go to click to sell whatever, like, oh, how much is a large pizza? $17.95. Okay, so I'll put 10,000. I'll put this in the order book as a sell for this much in US dollar. And this is, markets are created by people's subjective experience of the real world. And just like any decently advanced technology, it's not magic. It's not great until it's in the palms of the hands of the people. If I make an iPhone, make all these really incredible apps for it. I go up on stage, WWDC, and Steve Jobs, and I'm like, look at this iPhone, look at this, it's glass, it's amazing. I got all these apps, the calculators in your back pocket forever now. Isn't this great, everybody? If I was like, yeah, it's pretty dope. I would love to have one of those. Well, fuck you. You don't get one. It's all for me. Okay, and then and that's it. And then so now it's like the value of the market of the iPhone is now one, right? And I cannot value it. I can't sell it on the street. I'm the only one that has it. So that's what the concept of an economy of scale in economics comes from. Can I value something intrinsically, extrinsically, create a peer-to-peer market order book for it? Will people want to buy and sell it? Yes. Will they want to do that at scale globally? Yes. Will they want me to repeat that action in order to continue to create more outsized value? Yes. That is an economy of scale. That's an economy. You have to create an economy to create value. And when you create a new public blockchain, i.e. something like Bitcoin, which is peer-to-peer value transfer, point A to point B, sending money, cool. I've got to wait for that market to mature. I got to let more people be sending it peer-to-peer, right, over time. And as Bitcoin garners more adoption, sees larger price rises. People value this more, and as the asset becomes more scarce, people are like, oh shit, my 10,000 Bitcoins now I only have like 5 Bitcoin. Oh shit, well, now it's worth like $60,000 each to me. You know what I mean? It matures over time. Same with Ethereum. Here's a network that can do everything Bitcoin can do. Well, until I wrote some interesting smart contracts that differentiated it from Bitcoin, and then I interoperated them together, and now I've got a Uniswap that talks to a compound that lets me send my ETH to another contract, that lets me borrow, that lets me lend, and I can go over here and buy some USDC, and like now we're like building this web, right? And then there's all these different nodes and these points like edges, and now and then all these edges is value. And all that value is peer-to-peer, and it's all subjective. And that's how money is created. So the oddity of things are, most in the rule of creating things on the internet is when you generalize at first, usually you try and do all or nothing, and you end up failing. But Bitcoin came along and had one use case, and it did a really fucking good, which was send money around, simple UTXO transfer encumbrance, and then individuals got money. Awesome. You didn't even know how it worked, but it was dope. Spread around, people bought, sell drugs for it, great. Then someone like Vitalik and others came along and they said, what if we added more expressibility to that? Well, first they tried to do it with Bitcoin, and people were like, no, Bitcoin does one thing and does it good, fuck off. And then Vitalik was like, all right, cool. Hit up me and my smart friends, and we're going to work on, and ironically, Vitalik started Bitcoin magazine, and started writing all about Bitcoin and became enamored with it. And then when he wanted to add additional generalizability to Bitcoin, everyone was like, no, you can't flood the OP return with all this information. You're gonna cause all this state bloat, which is true. And years later, Vitalik is still learning how to handle state bloat, but that's a whole other different discussion for a whole different set of nerds. But but it worked because at the time it was something people needed because they were just holding Bitcoin. But they were like, well, now we got this Ethereum thing. I can use Ethereum as this essentially gas, and now there's this use. Before I just sent Bitcoin to Bitcoin, but now I've got to spend Ethereum in order to run something on Ethereum. Okay, cool. Now I have this another like intersubjective peer-to-peer transaction happening. That's a whole other means of value creation. Now I've created all these different smart contracts that are now talking to each other. And this is something that didn't exist before Bitcoin. Now it's interesting. And then also it can interoperate backwards with Bitcoin. Great. Ethereum is successful. If Ethereum had existed first, it might not have worked, because it didn't have a whole group of developers that understood what things like Bitcoin were, understand what Ethereum was. Ethereum wouldn't have had all of its outsized extra liquidity and people who were converting early Bitcoin in order to get an allotment of Ethereum, which borrowed Bitcoin's economy of scale and allowed people to hedge on the future value of another more generalized one. Like, it was a process. Now, we've got Bitcoin and Ethereum who are number 1 and 2. And when we want to know why that is, it's because one of them created a hardcore proof of work that garnered an economy of scale around it. Then the other one came in and like piggybacked off of it and did it. And now they're both proof of work. No other proof of stake chain is in number 1 or 2. And until Ethereum makes its swap, which again, now that it has a harder long tail distribution of individuals that are holding Ethereum, when they stake, that power won't collude. That's the name of the game, at least. So the only way forward now is you need to create something application specific from the start and provide something that is, again, loosely coupled away from these different blockchains to formulate and add to the stack that will garner its own economy of scale, its own peer-to-peer, value interactions, and then eventually it will meet the level of subjective value and reach that same plane that Bitcoin or Ethereum at and compete with it. Not against them to be the currency, but with them. But its generalized use case might be so much more interesting than doing a little bit of everything like Ethereum, or doing one thing like Bitcoin. Maybe it can do a little bit more than Bitcoin, and it's a little bit more restricted than Ethereum. And then you account for state bloat, you account for like optimizing that going forward, and then you have another successful chain on the stack. And that's why moving from these different narrative investment theses are very important. Where it was Bitcoin, peer-to-peer value transfer. It was Ethereum, decentralized exchanges and generalizability. Now we've got the decentralized web, right? Who's going to store my shit? Who's going to be my decentralized like naming service? Who's going to be my decentralized VPN? Who's going to be my decentralized like indexer so that I can make like, the equivalent of like SQL calls and like pull information and put it in my database and understand my users and like have that referenceable and etc. Like we need all those things, but we don't need them all on Ethereum. Yeah. And we definitely don't need them all on Bitcoin, because if we do that, now we have centralization risk. Though we're on a decentralized network, we've centralized all our services to this one decentralized network, to which if something happened to it, all of our services fall flat. That's nonsense, right? If you have the means to construct things that are better. It's hard. It is an art and a science of multiple disciplines in combination. And you got to find the right people to build those things that are willing to leave money on the table. Like you got to have people that don't fucking care about money to build blockchains. If the people that are building your blockchains are not hardcore, super autistic fucking Asperger nerds that sit inside all day, they probably care about money. And if they care about money, they're not going to want to leave it on the table. So they're going to print themselves just a little bit, right? They're not going to be altruistic with it. Like for instance, like with Handshake is a chain that I worked on. It was an experiment in the gift economy. How much of this chain can we give away in the beginning to ensure that there's a lot of intersubjective means that people are valuing this chain early on? And can we give it to the right people that benefit our application-specific use case, i.e. being a replacement drop-in for DNS, right? Like if you're going to soft fork the internet, you need some developers that understand the internet and understand crypto. And well, why are they going to work for Handshake for free if they can make X thousand multiples off of the Zebra coin or whatever, rhyme or reason might pop up in the day? So now you got to speak to them intellectually. You got to speak to them socially. You got to convince them that there is a community, almost a cult we're following here, that's going to like lead them towards riches and wealth and that self-actualization and the escape from scarcity by creating scarcity. That's the real mind fucking crypto, is that to create wealth, you've got to create scarcity first.
I completely agree with that.
It's wild like how like value works. So then when when hardcore Bitcoiners who say things like Bitcoin is it, you're going to be able to build everything on Bitcoin, look up their LinkedIn, look at their Twitter, go through their history. Are they a business person? Probably. Are they an investor person? Probably. Are they a trader person? Probably. Are they a developer? More than likely not. Are they the distributed systems developer? More than likely not. Are they a cryptographer? More than definitely not. And until you check all those boxes, I don't give a shit about your opinion, because you only understand one piece of the puzzle. I've been in this shit almost a decade now. You know what I mean? Like you can't tell me nothing that I don't have some anecdote where I can point to where that didn't work. Because people have tried it, really smart people. And there's people way smarter than me that listen to some of the things I say and they're like, oh, that's not quite right. And then now you're also now you've got this thing where everyone is competing on this intellectual meritocracy to prove that they have a more generalized understanding where they've escaped scarcity. They're not working from a place of greed and not trying to sell you on some bullshit. Like, oh, I've never touched a cryptocurrency in my fucking life. I'm a CEO of a car company, of solar.
Oh
You know,
yeah, that's such a slippery
all that.
slope.
Let me pump Dogecoin. I already once got in trouble with the SEC. Let me explain one reason. Let me try and convince people to buy this decentralized thing that I don't understand the downside risk of, but I know that I'm going to make free money on it. Like, that is greed. That is greed. Like, people like that cannot build a crypto related community or a blockchain that is anywhere near viable, because it's created for the self. It's not created for collect.
The one last thing on the idea of value, and this is sort of a leading question, so we'll see if it leads down a good alley. When you initially mentioned how value has to be created, you said that kind of somebody has to be ruled for it to occur, right? And yep. Would you say that one of the innovations of would you say one of the innovations of crypto is that it sort of innovates to, there has to be a set of rules that people decide are worth utilizing. So it's switching from it requires some form of rulership to it allows sort of, I mean, we know that rulers in general are consent of the governed, but it becomes often very unclear very quickly. You know, you get a despotic leader, and very quickly it doesn't look like consent of the governed. But would you say that one of the innovations of crypto is to make the consent of the governed more clear?
Yes, you're getting to a point of the theory of crypto that's really enamored me over the past few years, that I just exited that phase of thinking, and I've moved into like solar and permaculture now. But that's just the concept of governance.
Yeah.
What is governance?
Yeah.
What is legitimacy? Who creates legitimacy, and who do I lend the legitimacy to create my money? Right? Before, it's like you were born, you got a birth certificate, it's owned by the United States government. You're Josh Terry. You're going to go work and you're going to go make money. And the money you're going to make is US dollar, because you need that to pay your taxes. All right, you just take that as a given. Yeah. You just take that as a given. Like, I got to earn some US dollar because that's what they take to pay my taxes. Obvious. That's what I need. Right? But so when you get the concept of crypto and you get deeper in the weeds, and first you're like, oh, Bitcoin is this peer-to-peer thing for money. Ethereum is this peer-to-peer thing for contracts. And then it's like, oh, wow, these things have really large market caps. Oh, wow, I can really coordinate people well in there. Oh, wow, this removes a lot of overhead for coordination. Oh, wow, these are nation states. like cryptocurrencies are the new version of countries. They are the new United States. They are the new China. They are the new Russia. They are, because they provide everything you need with a known rule set where we come into consensus on it, and then we're using our time as a form of intrinsic value to inject that into the chain, and then we speak about it publicly, extrinsically, outside of ourselves, and then that creates moneyness. And so we move from a world where we don't get to choose who runs our money to we get to choose not only who runs our money, but we could choose to make our own. And I don't mean like just hard forking another cryptocurrency and taking that, because that doesn't work. It's more so like I can opt into the United States government and paying the United States taxes and like going work a normal 9 to 5 and doing that, getting a W-2, getting normal income, or I can literally exist online on the internet, maintain my US American citizenship, earn Bitcoin, earn Ethereum, use that as a means to like how I earn online. I'm a remote first worker. I only get paid in crypto. I only interface and work with other people that provide me cryptographic assurances that at the end of my employment that I'm going to get paid more. I don't need to worry about unions. I don't need to worry about like my union is digital, my union is a smart contract, and my freedom is digital. Like so when you go to saying, oh, we want to create a future world global government where there are no barriers, how the fuck were you going to do that with normal money? You cannot create a borderless world where the US dollar is still the reserve asset. I'm sorry. You're not going to have that, because at the end of the day, even if we have decentralized everything else, but most people are still pegging their balance sheets to the US dollar, the US government has control over the way the world works. And though the US government might want that to be the case, they have surely realized over time with the emergence of cryptocurrency that the way to rule the world is not through the military, it's through the digital currency money. So people think, well, World War III is going to happen. Unfortunately, World War III already started. World War III is crypto, and we've been doing it for 10 years. And we've been trying to create the most viable, long-term, sustainable cryptographic peer-to-peer money that is secure. that the majority of my US dollars are in it. There's a reason why Bitcoin blows up has a happening every 4 years around the US presidential election. Okay. This stuff wasn't accidentally created. It was purposely created so that every 4 years when who's about to run for president, let's pump Bitcoin to the moon. Let's make you observe this financial state and your reality and observe our timeline that says like this is where value is going. And people don't directly attribute Bitcoin with the West, and they don't directly attribute Ethereum with the East and Russia and China, but they should. They really should, because Bitcoin was created specifically by the West, and it was constructed in a way in which the East would manufacture the hardware to sustain it, because they had the economy of scale and the means and the supply chain to do it. It's kind of, they just knew. And then at the same time, Ethereum came along. They're like, we need to make this GPU compliant. We need to make it ASIC resistant so that we can get the whole rest of the world running their little miners on their little gaming computers. And that means we're Russia and China. We can make those things, but how do we reach the US? Well, we can't make it ASIC friendly from the start. And there's a reason why Bitcoin sits up here still and Ethereum sits up here still, because Ethereum hasn't moved to proof of stake yet, and its miners can still use GPUs. So there is no application-specific integrated circuit that's being produced at scale in the same which the iPhone 12 has a certain number of sales and numbers, which creates a walled garden around Apple. The more double shot 256 ASICs that exist in the world, the higher it is. So if you build an application-specific chain, something like Handshake or something like that, you understand the novel construction and how proof of work works. You build and manufacture one, and you hope that the East will catch on to it, and you give the majority of the genesis block of that asset and the early asset distribution to the West. Now you're creating economic machinations of diplomacy, right? So there's a balance of power. I've got the money, well, I control the hardware. Well, I control the hardware. Well, I control the money. Where I control and that is a global government. And that's essentially what's happening, is we're creating global diplomacy through cryptography.
So I think this connects to something you mentioned briefly. I think there's a connection here. This makes it a little bit more personal. Why do pseudonyms matter?
Pseudonyms are useful because, well, first let me explain why I don't care about pseudonyms, and then I'll explain why other people care about pseudonyms, because there's a difference here. There exists something called social capital, right? For me, brown kid, minority, young looking fella, you know what I mean? I pull up in a place and I say, I've got all these skills. I can do all this thing. This is my track record. People are like, you're lying. We don't believe that, because we don't have pattern recognition to believe that. We don't have priors that say that people that look like you can do all those things. Okay. So I've got to struggle with garnering enough social capital. There's a book that I've read, actually, and I stand by it. And this is the words you should never forget. So good, they can't ignore you.
I literally recommended that book to someone today.
It's true. It's like, be so fucking good at what you do that to ignore you is to that person's detriment, right?
And it fits right in line with the 48 laws of power as well.
Exactly. You got it. Also a big fan of that. So it's like, for me, it's all about referent power. Referent, not legitimate. Not anything granted to me, not coercive. I didn't steal it. I earned it. Yes. And you can't take that from me. Just acknowledge. You can't beat my track record that I made a bunch of people millionaires. You can't beat my track record that I helped ship dope code that scaled crypto. You cannot remove the fact that I helped launch Handshake. I own the private keys to block number 1. You can't tell me shit. You know what I mean? And it's and that's what I mean is be so good that they can't ignore you, and that I have the social capital. So now more people that look like me show up, and that pattern recognition happens, and now we have wealth creation for Indigenous Americans, Black Americans, and mixed race Americans that can look at me as an example, right? In the same sense as when I was in 11th, 12th grade or whatever in high school when Barack Obama was running, I had never seen somebody that looked like me that was on TV, and I didn't vote for him because he looked like me. I voted for him because he looked like me, he talked like me, he carried himself like me, he had a vision that I thought that somebody like me would possess, and then that got me into that world. And though I still work adjacent from politics, what I do is very much relevant to it. And so, and the same thing happens in crypto. So if I was pseudonymous and I was doing all this shit, I'd be doing myself a disfavor culturally and to other minorities if I did not say, nah, I did this. I worked with XYZ on this. This is me. Now, the importance of a pseudonym in crypto is if you come from privilege, if you come from wealth, if you still work part-time, full-time at a job elsewhere, and you don't want people to know what you're moonlighting doing during the day under the desk on your phone or in the evenings from 6 to 9, right? Then you would probably want a pseudonym. If you were building stuff and you didn't care about your social capital and you're building experimental tools that ultimately could lose people money, but it's for you're like a scientist purely for the sake of experimentation, and you understand there's a downside risk, you want to hide your actual identity. So in which case something does happen, you can, and then if something great happens, great. Now your pseudo-anonymous identity has more value. But for me, there's good and bad with pseudonymity. Pseudonymity means that at the end of the day, I'm not willing to hedge and risk the entirety of my social capital, of my real identity, on you not getting fucked over. Every single day, I put my real name on some shit, right? If something happened to somebody or someone, whatever, someone would point and say, Stephen Mckie did that, he fucked up. And that's good. I want people to be able to do that for me. I don't want people to be like, that random anime character with the big anime titties on Twitter with the 3,000 followers told me I should buy Shark Coin and I made 2,000%, but I didn't sell at the top and somebody dumped on me and like now my $2,000 I put in is worth $120, but my rent's due. You know what I mean? And I've been in crypto long enough where I've seen people do that, and I've had friends where I've watched people literally construct those mechanisms purely just to farm value from the less fortunate. And like that's no good. So
goddamn Shark Coin.
My fucking Shark Coin. So I like to like push people to be like, if you got it, if you good like that, use your name. Mm-hmm. And so now I have a hedge fund, Momentum, where I'm like, you got it, you're good, you're public, you're willing to hedge your future, your ego and everything on this venture. Have some pre-seed money, have some early stage money. I understand your technology. Other people might not. It might take them 3 or 4 years, but you can riff with me about it. Until then, there's a place for pseudonymity and there's a place for your real identity. And after a certain point, once you've garnered enough skills, just be yourself.
Yeah, they make me wonder. There's a lot to be said for personal responsibility. So it's like, mm-hmm. Not utilizing the pseudonym enables that. Because it's like personal responsibility it is something you can voluntarily take on, but I think it's useful to have sort of an external force that automatically places a little bit on you so that you don't have to think about it every single time. Where there's like a little bit of automatic, oh yeah, I'm responsible in this scenario. And pseudonyms do reduce that. And at the same time, it's really interesting how, does it increase the decentralization of the network? Does it act as a balance, like a check and balance to things that get stuck due to reputation, right? Because it's like mm-hmm. somebody can garner so much social capital. I mean, the classic is the whistleblower, right? Like social capital that nobody can speak out against them. And it's mm-hmm. a really weird thing to explore. Like, okay, what's the benefits of pseudonyms and what are the downsides to pseudonyms? The next thing I wanted to ask you, because I'm guessing that you know more about this than me, and I'd love mm-hmm. to hear a little bit about it. And I think it leads to eventually to HNS as well, which is mm-hmm. what is the Great Chinese Firewall?
Yeah. So think about it like this. So when the internet started to come online, we'll use the United States as an example because that's kind of where all the parties started. You had all these big technical universities like, Harvard and Stanford and MIT and et cetera, with these great engineering, departments, math departments, et cetera. And they were experimenting with building the first, essentially like intranets. So TCP/IP, being able to send packets back and forth to each other from like known servers. Things like DNS didn't exist yet, so the domain name service. So like being able to say google.com goes to this, before it was like 192.168. You had to know the IP address. You had to know what information you wanted from that server, put it into your little terminal, like we were talking about earlier. Click that and wait for it to download and pull from that information, and then at, pre-dial-up speeds, right? And you had to wait for that information to like propagate and like come to your device. And so the internet started as like this decentralized thing, essentially, with individuals sending things. And then as time went on, it became more centralized due to abstractions. So, okay, email exists. Well, running your own email server isn't a lot of fun. Like making sure it has uptime because you got your fucking receipt from, from the mall purchase or whatever, and like having like that's a pain in the ass.
So sorry, I gotta cut in. So, for simple speak, for me, so when the internet started, you needed all of the internet on each individual computer. Is that kind of
you needed to have like your own like server that you were running that had your own information, but you had to know you didn't have a phone book, you didn't have a digital phone book. Essentially, you had to know like X and Y Z's lab at the other university across the country, and you had to know that what they were working on, and then you would have to like make that request and like go into your terminal and like put that in and like get that information and like download it.
So the information was owned by different people, but the access was decentralized.
Correct. So because at that point it was basically all manual. It was like having having payphones all over the place, right? Decentralized, but you need to know Kathy's number to call Kathy, right? So then just like a payphone, and eventually over time we had phone books, right? So you get a little yellow phone book in your mail every year-ish, and then it would have all your neighbors' phone numbers and all the services you need, locksmith, whatever, plumber, and then you would use that as your reference when you went to go access and get information, right? So as a phone book is an abstraction for like phones, DNS, domain name servers, right, and being able to append a certain name to a certain IP address to receive information easily was an abstraction to make the user experience of the internet easier, right? So the internet is the simple peer-to-peer thing that then had all these centralized abstractions put on top just to make it easier. And so my example was running an email server sucks. I'm just going to use Gmail, Yahoo, or AOL Instant Messenger, or like AOL Online, and like using my AOL.com email because I already paid for it every month. And then so they'll run all my servers for me. They'll maintain the uptime for me. They'll make sure everything's working. They'll help me block some spam so I don't have to run my own custom spam filters. It just makes shit easier, right? So that's dope. So over time, you've had all these abstractions, and that's how we went to like Web 1.0, Web 2.0. So like Web 1.0 was like, Amazon, like pre-Amazon area, GeoCities, where we've got some internet websites working. We've got DNS now. People are buying second level domains and using them to map their information that they hold on a server or a host somewhere to another client that exists on the internet. And then all these services raise millions and billions of dollars, right, through like venture capitalists that were like, cool, you're going to run email servers, cool, you're going to run databases to store information, it's cool. Oh, you're going to run a search engine and you're going to index all this information. I'm going to pay you. Cool. And like now you've got these multi-million-dollar businesses, and they're like, cool, well, now we need revenue. Well, we only do email. We only do search. What do we do? I mean, I guess we can start selling the data that we have, right? Well, who wants it? I don't know, governments, other businesses that are running this. You want to run analytics on it, da-da-da-da. And then, hey, well, this is the only thing that's making us money, and we're like all public now. So like, let's just keep fucking doing it.
It's also innocent.
Cool with it. But that's what I go back to my point earlier. It's emergent evolution. Yes. It wasn't malicious. Yes. It was the means to which the internet was deployed, and the fact that it was only utilized by a small group of people that had the tool sets, the technical capability to go in a terminal and request and know information, know those people existed at those universities, versus let's just make all those accessible via website and let's centralize people's access to that. And then we had another evolution as we got like broadband. So like, internet through your coaxial cable through your phone, and like that was like night and day. So it was like, cool. Like now we had people, I'm gonna run my own server at home. I'm gonna download all my music. I'm gonna pirate it from LimeWire, from Napster, from whatever, and then I'm gonna stream. Yeah, right. Like I'm gonna download an Eminem album because I want it and I need it and I gotta have it. And oops, I might actually downloaded some porn and also might download a virus. But oh well, I'm learning. And whoops, and and then so now you got your own little server, and then everyone was like, well, I need a hard drive for all this stuff. I gotta find a way to catalog my songs. I need to burn them to a CD. We had all these analog things that were at least putting some friction between you and centralization. Then As Web 2 emerged further, we got Spotify, right? We got like all these other different services, Apple Music. So now I don't need an iPod anymore. I'm not maintaining my own library. That's a pain in the ass. I'm on the go. I got all the world's music right here. I just pay X and Y Z 99 cents a month. See what I mean? So it just got more and more centralized over time because these services and infrastructure got more expensive to run as the internet scaled. So they need to make money in more ways. And coincidentally, the people that usually have the most money left over are the government and like huge, large families of like wealth. So what happened over time? It centralized more and more through acquisitions and mergers, and eventually like the internet itself becoming this pseudo public utility, right? You got Icann, which manages like the whole world, like basically kind of like DNS, and like and says, you want to be a registrar, you want to be a registrar, you want to be a registrar, cool. You want to be a part of this decentralized internet, you need to go through us, this centralized body, which we say isn't an American, government institution, but just so happens a lot of them happen to work there and interface with it and have, whatever like contracts and etc. So it's like Icann itself and all of its general associated entities and certificate authorities that work with it, to keep the internet running. That just created more centralization. So you get to a point where now we have decentralized money like Bitcoin. Like, cool, I can run a Bitcoin node. Cool, I can send my money here, there, left, and right. But who's sending my data packets? Comcast. Who's essentially going to be the person that's going to be able to stop me from interacting on the Bitcoin network? Your internet service provider. Or you go further down the line, Icann saying that like, this person that owns this like this .com or this like whatever, like you longer as a registrar can no longer do that because like you broke this rules. You're servicing Bitcoin people, you're servicing Ethereum people, or your bank literally being like, I see you bought Bitcoin on Coinbase, we're gonna shut down your Bank of America account, your Chase account. You know what I mean? So then we decentralized and then realized we still had all this centralization risk from the other pieces that were still like, centralized. So just like you have like the Federal Reserve, and then you have all the Federal Reserve banks that then take money and then they lend out in the fractional reserve to other banks, and they lend out that money in perpetuity, like, and it just like spreads outwards. You have like now the Icann, which is essentially the Federal Reserve of the internet, which like dictates what value and information goes along it, and it's all maintained by the U.S.'s sphere of influence, but everyone in the world wants to access this information. So if you're China and you want to maintain a certain narrative so that your population is safe from American westernized ideologies, then you would make it so that they can only access certain on-ramps and certain fire hoses of information. You can't use Twitter. You better use a VPN for that if you're here. And if you're here using the VPN for that, you better be American. Or if you're just Chinese and you're here in our country, you're going to go to our version of Twitter. You're going to go to our version of Facebook. You're going to go to our, because it goes back to that centralization, right? They have control over those entities, but they can't be control over American entities. So what they do is they can't get on their cap tables and they can't influence them with their money, which China's gotten better at. Let's instead create a mirrored version of those services, which is where China got this copycat, kind of brand from. And then at the same time, like, let's like block the access to all those other outside sites. That is the concept of the Great Firewall of China. In the past, China was ruled by physical means. In the third dimension, 3D, that we're going to put a physical fucking wall that traps you into Chinese ideology. Literally, that's what the wall was for. It was less so to keep people out, more so to keep ideology in, right? It's because you can't create an empire, as I was going. You cannot create people to create value around your scarce asset that you've created that has no real intrinsic or extrinsic value. It's just a bank ledger, and you're saying adding another one or another zero to the equation, right? Over and over and over again. Well, if I don't like you, I can just leave and then go use someone else's money. Well, you better get over that wall. So now it's like, oh, you want to change your perspective on your Chinese nationality, and you don't really like the yuan, and you like idolize Western culture. Well, we're going to block you from that. We're going to keep you from that. And over time, we're going to get better at it with AI-related systems. We're going to eventually integrate centralized, digitally backed currencies where I have the capability of ultimate and all transparency, but I also control the money printing still. I'm going to create our own version of, whatever, decentralized DNS. We're going to create our, basically it's like China likes to control by constricting informational flow, and the United States likes to control by expanding informational flow. And so eventually both of these things are going to be at odds with each other. And like, that's the point of inflection that we've reached. And that's why we've gotten to the point now where we've got decentralized money. We need to decentralize everything else, but we also need to make it so that the services that people in China are accessing in crypto are the exact same as the services that everyone else is interfacing with. And in order to do that, we have to decentralize.
The reason why I initially opened with like what's the Chinese firewall is I kind of wanted to paint sort of a carrot and stick sort of thing going on here, which is, you know, we generally run away from pain and run towards pleasure, and I think that there's some pretty concerning, obviously, things about the concept of the firewall. So that's our metaphorical stick in this case. And what you described of what the West is set up as right now, with Icann handling a large portion of the naming systems, it doesn't sound super far removed to me. I'm assuming that within the firewall, they have their version of Icann. It's under control, right? And what we have is we have Icann, and maybe a couple of other things here and there, but it's still so centralized that, to me, that's one or two takeovers away from not under control, right? Or out of control. And to me, that's pretty concerning to have, all of internet in that scenario. Like how far do you think we are from? And I'm not trying to paint like a doomsday scenario here. It's just like there's a humorous thing that Elon Musk says when people bring up global warming is he's like, well, this is an experiment that's kind of dumb to play out, right? Like, whether you think it's global warming is happening or not, whether you think that like we're 6 months out or 15 years out or 30 years out, it's still a dumb experiment, right? Like to play the let's put more carbon in the air game. And with the centralization of the internet, to me that feels like another one of those dumb experiments to continue, where it's like, even if there were 0.01% risk of us getting in a scenario where the internet were not under the control, like not under the control of the individual, that's even 0.01% is kind of a little disturbing.
Well, I guess you have to think of society kind of like as an ongoing program that's being written. Society and just like human evolution as a whole, and like kind of what we're doing on the grand macro scheme of everything. And so if we're a program that's just being compiled, think of it as like just-in-time compilation. So think of it as like just-in-time decentralization. Like, society has progressed up to a linear point on centralized hierarchies, and it's gotten us so far, right, technologically, to the point where it's going to be to our downside risk, our benefit, if it were to continue. Because clearly at this point, our environment's at stake, our national security is at stake, right, continuously, with centralized servers and like data and information and stuff like that, even from a government standpoint. And then it's just normal U.S. citizens that are working, getting normal college degrees and going to work for the government that are helping to secure these things. So it's like, but the opponents on the other side get just as more technologically advanced and more with their own like hardware and software and etc. Over time to like be able to compete with us, to the point where now we're relying on their technology, which is what the White House is afraid of with the like 5G rollout and stuff like that, using China's infrastructure to do that. And then they could be backdooring it, but there's, for every economic reason, it makes sense that they do that. So now we've got this centralization of production risk too. So decentralized systems like Bitcoin, Ethereum, things like Handshake, that are working to decentralize the internet itself, are coming just in time to help decentralize like those industries those different technological components that like drive like our modern systems. And they're going to allow us to rake back in that control, like kind of reconfigure, reformat how we go about doing these things, and put those economies of scale and those incentives in place to the right individuals that are going to be able to do that best. And it's great because it's a global competition now to recreating much of these centralized systems that exist in the physical world, and creating a secure, decentralized, distributed version of that in the digital crypto world, like with DeFi and all these different tools and technologies that enable those different components to work together. Ones for organizations like DAOs, things for the internet like Handshake for storage, like Filecoin, etc. They're going to eventually bleed into how we interact with farming, how we interact with like commerce and in the physical peer-to-peer nature with like moving around and selling goods. Like, and when the government gets shitty at it, like we're gonna have to be able to do our own global form of like logistics. Especially if the world is in some form of centralized disarray, we can have decentralized order, at least, and at certain scales that you can at least opt into. So it's like those two concepts, centralization and decentralization, are clashing, right? But that friction is where we kind of find what we need to displace, what needs to remain, what can be fixed, and then eventually we'll move past that, and we'll be in a more stable place. But yeah, there's going to be friction. But now we have systems that create incentives that we can say, well, we're going to put this capital and this liquidity towards this incentive, so we can accelerate the which by which we manifest this tool or the solution. Which in the physical world doesn't really exist without having to rely on raising money from a centralized person like myself and like my fund, right? Like, yeah, it's great. Like I have like a fund, but there are things that a DAO can do that flexibly that I can't, that I would like to be able to do, but I'm stricken to U.S. laws and regulations. Like the SEC, the CFTC, the CFTC. They all have like certain restrictions for like how I can move my money around. That I would not have to worry about if it was in a DAO. So there's way more upside and potential to have that money there. Then now I've got to compete against that. But I am helping build those tools to be that competition. So eventually I can just opt into that myself, right? So there's an incentive for me to do that because eventually my job is going to get easier, and I'm going to make money to do it. And so like the good thing about crypto is it'll pay you to get rid of your job. It'll pay you very well if you do it right. And that's kind of cool. Like where else, what other industry do you have that sort of flexibility?
Yeah, it brings us to mind the thought that we are very unaware of the fact day to day that our infrastructure systems are almost always just strong enough and no more.
Yeah.
And it goes along with what you described of like the development of a system in general, right? Where it's right. Like it evolves, right? And why would you evolve in any way other than just enough? And to me, the crypto solutions are interesting. That the decentralization seems to preempt weaknesses. Maybe not preempt them. Maybe it just patches them faster. But
yes.
So with
hot fixes for the real world.
Yeah. So like with this stuff in mind, let's ask the question. So what is HNS, and where does that plug into what this conversation is about?
Absolutely. So I've hinted at it many times, but just as I said before, like we have Bitcoin, we're great for transmitting value. Ethereum great for sharing value in transit, right? So eventually we want to append it. We want to do that globally, but we want to be loosely coupled from Bitcoin, which is doing its thing, and Ethereum, which is doing its thing. Like you can have Ethereum and the Ethereum name service, and the Ethereum name service can talk back to traditional DNS systems, like the current domain name system, and work with Icann and etc. and make that compatible with Ethereum. But again, that's still tightly coupled to Ethereum. And so you can have a .eth name, which is all good, joshterry.eth, and have it resolved, like somewhere, in another decentralized web manner. That's great. But all that is part of like the Ethereum like value chain, which is great. So if something happens to Ethereum, your name base goes down. If I build a multi-billion, trillion-dollar industry on top of that, right? Like, that's a lot of centralization. That just like, it looks like decentralization, but it's a lot of centralization back to all the way down to the root anchor layer 1. So Ethereum can work interoperably with Handshake, in that if Handshake is a root anchor in its own decentralized DNS, and that there is a proof of work that miners are solving every 10 minutes in order to produce, as of now, 2,000 Handshake, and until the 170,000th block, to which that will then happen, very similar to Bitcoin and its 4-year halving schedule. For Ethereum, Handshake is about 3.25-ish years. So these miners are competing to secure the Handshake chain, right? And so Handshake's core use case there in the middle, its target is to be the root anchor of DNS. So currently Icann is that system who says, okay, you want to be a name registrar, do this very expensive application, $100,000+, wait multiple years to get ready to announce these like new TLDs, then of which like you can be one of potentially many other companies that can then make money on top of selling second level domains. So like when you go to GoDaddy, Namecheap.com, you buy like JoshTerry.com, right? You're buying from that registrar that has the rights and permissions to be able to sell .com, right? They pay money to be able to do all that. So and then every year they bill you, right? And so they can like pay their costs to the big guy. And so then you have all these different certificate authorities that also like basically pay to like get access to be able to say, this is the root of like where the internet is, and you can trust us because I can trust us, and so we're cool. So if you need a certificate, hit us up, and we'll be able to say that your site's legit on the internet. So Handshake's like, cool. What if we just got rid of all that overhead, all that margin, all that money, all those middlemen, and just made it so you can bid and buy a top level domain. So, I believe you own like Josh Terry. So, if you now have .Josh Terry in the same sense that you would have control of .com, except the only amount of money you spent to get that name is how much you spent bidding with your Handshake itself on the network and opening up an auction for that name, which then once that auction is open, anyone in the world can see that auction is open and also bid against you. So you do the second price victory auction, which means that over the course of the bidding period, there's a bid period where you submit a blind, which is like your actual bid that you wish to put for a name, say like 1 Handshake, and then your mask, which is like say 100 Handshake. So when your bid goes out, the network, they see 101 Handshake for a bid. And then so they're like, all right, well, I don't want to bid against Josh Terry. I don't need that name. Nah, I don't want to buy that. The bid period finishes, goes to the reveal period. You reveal your actual bid. So anyone that bid against you could also see your real bid now, your mask. So they realize, oh, you didn't actually bid 100 Handshake. You bid 1, and then you fake us out and like bid a mask of like 100. Cool, haha, sneaky. And then so it sort of gamifies it there as like competing against others, like peer-to-peer for these different valuable assets. And then at the end of the process, once you've won your name, you register it and you redeem back your original Handshake. So you get back your 100 or whatever. And then your 1 Handshake that you bid on the name, if no one else had bid against you, would actually have been free. Because it's the second price, and there's no second price, no one else bid, so you bid 0. So now you own Josh Terry for free on the D-Web. Or if someone else had bid against you and say they bid like 0.5, so you would have won, and then so you would have bid an actual like 1 Handshake. But instead you would have paid their 0.5, and so because it's second price. And so that's just how a victory auction works. Hopefully that makes sense, like said out loud. Usually it sounds complicated. There's usually a diagram. But that's it. That's the process of owning a top level domain instead of having all the overhead of registering with the Icann, going through a multi-year process to get it, paying for all that overhead. Now you own that on the network forever. And every 2 years, you just need to send one little transaction that states that you still control the name and you would like to pay to renew your block space, because every name comes with 512 bytes. That's a part of the handshake Urkel tree. So in Ethereum, there's what's called a Patricia tree, and Bitcoin itself that has its like the only unique like scripting UTXO system. It doesn't like really use any like particular like try mechanism for storage of like smart contract data and stuff. But for handshake, that's called covenants. So handshake has these covenants, and when you're bidding and like doing all that stuff, like those are covenants that are encumbering you to some future value and like state that's locked up to a certain block height. And then after that, once you like have like your name and all that stuff, you can then control whatever is stored at that 512 bytes forever. So your on-chain records that points to the name server that eventually that either you're running that then has like your A records that points to your index so that you can then resolve your name over a host and a client and get some information out to the internet. So handshake is the root of all that, and you store your either your name server information, or there's some other flexibility in there, I believe. So I think you can store like a .txt file as well. And so in that .txt file, you can have a JSON that points to a Bitcoin address, an Ethereum address, a Zcash address. You can also use it as a decentralized route for like liquidity and saying like where your address or your money exists like on the internet. And so because that root exists and it's secured by Handshake's economy of scale of all the people mining it, you can get creative and build different protocols on top of that then append back and commit to that root anchor to that 512 byte space. And create other like different mechanisms on layer 2, like storage, payments, like the Lightning Network, all different types of like, web, quote unquote 3 or DWeb, decentralized web services. And so essentially your handshake name is an NFT, a non-fungible asset that you use a fungible asset to buy, which is this scarce namespace that gives you 512 bytes, which so it's essentially it's like your own layer 1 chain on Handshake. So it's like an internet of internets that are a soft fork of the existing.
Okay, so let me see if I can. We've talked about this to some degree before, but let me see if I can translate this to see if I understand. So we currently have a way to create domain names that is centralized, and it's centralized to a point of rather concern. It's just one place, and we want a way to decentralize that, and we want to not have that under any specific person's control.
Correct.
But to maintain a system like that, you need some sort of energy system. So you have created a blockchain that has incentives built into it that give people.
I didn't.
Oh, sorry.
Myself,
Yeah.
But many other people involved.
A blockchain has been created that incentivizes people to maintain these domain names. Once that system is set up, that is then tagged on to Icann, the centralized system, to get their approval, so that it's an addition, not a substitute.
Yes.
So we have a new way to create domain names that no one can take away from you and no one can prevent access to.
Correct.
And that system is maintained by incentives of the mining process, which is much like Bitcoin mining process. Right. And we utilize HNS tokens as a currency to have a system to purchase these domain names. How am I doing so far?
Doing excellent so far. Every nail on the head.
Okay, cool. How many domain names are available to us currently through the Icann system?
Excellent question.
And what's available to us now?
This is gonna blow your mind. Okay. So Icann TLDs, there's probably about, last I checked, 1,514.
And that's like .com, .io,
.com, .org, .biz, .capital, .xy.
and it might seem like not a big deal to somebody who hasn't purchased a domain, but to anybody that's like tried to start a business on the internet, like you go sorting through the number of domains that are available, and very quickly you go, oh man, I can't find a domain that satisfies me, right? Like that's really common.
No, that is, you go say, okay, I'm going to open up a cafe in my downtown, and it's going to be called, Bob's Coffee. So you're like, all right, well, I'm gonna go to GoDaddy.com because I heard that's where I go to build websites because I don't know about websites. I love coffee, and so you go, Bob's Coffee, like, oh wow, .com, Bob'sCoffee.com. Well, wow, that's not for sale. Like that's a shame. But I can get a .club for $17 a year. And like, who's at that weird price for this, random thing? But like, okay, well, I'm gonna get the .club. And then I'm like, okay, I'm buying that. And they're like, well, now I'm going to need my hosting. And I got to set up my email now with my name. And I got to do all this sort of stuff. So it's like, there's already all this overhead with like needing to get online, so to speak, with your brand. That like to remove and take away that margin of all those people that make money on top of that is a really huge deal. And it's part of the equation of how Handshake really works to be really successful game theoretically, because there's a saying by Jeff Bezos, and I might really murder this saying, but I remember he said something like something about your margin is my. I think you might know it all.
I know what you're thinking of. Let me look it up. I know what you're talking about.
But my spin on that is I just forget what the last word is. Oh man, it's gonna hit me in a second.
Your margin is my opportunity.
Exactly. So in this case, your margin is our namespace. So in the sense that you need to, work with Icann, whatever, keep your costs down, keep them low, or whatever. For your business, all your operation expenditures, you want to make sure that you don't have to charge people more than necessary every year for their .org or for whatever. Which there's a whole centralized issue and discussion about that in the news about, who wants to control like .org and etc. But, you can look into like just the general political overhead of dealing with internet names, that getting all that away and just allowing someone to buy it for pennies on the dollar from a protocol that has this legitimacy and this backwards compatibility with your existing web. Where you only have 1,514 TLDs to choose from, and now, as of this very moment, which I'm like searching for right now, there are over 1,096,892 names on Handshake. So there's already, many multiples over the amount of existing branding opportunities, emojis, different Punycode, like little Unicodes. You can actually use the actual like Chinese like symbology like in your actual like domain name and have that of your particular brand versus like some Latin based expression of that in like some .com or something like that. So it's universally language compatible. As long as it falls into this 63 character and certain like specific like policy as far as like dictionary and etc. But that's just to make it backwards compatible with the existing Icann TLD system, so it matches the same rule character wise. But you can also like fit in all sorts of different types of stuff. So Punycode, so you can have emojis. You can own an emoji, like the shit emoji. If someone owns that as a TLD, that's great. People have made a lot of money selling those things. And so again, but you're just paying the protocol a little bit of Handshake in order to get access to all this. So once you own that name, you can be the guy that sells the second level domains. You can be the GoDaddy. You can be Go Mama now. It doesn't matter. You start a Go Mama and you can start selling people access to your now Handshake TLDs that people are going to be able to resolve like over the D-Web if they have a backwards compatible resolver. And you'll be able to reach the Handshake web, just as simple as that. And that's great. So there are web browsers already, like Puma browser, Handy browser, which some of my friends work on. Another one called NextDNS, which is just like a simple like service, like DNS service that allows you to resolve Handshake names, and you can just click that on and like have that as like your VPN on your device. So you can set that up in a few minutes. HDNS.io, which is you literally just copy the records and go into your backend of like your phone settings and like paste that in, and then now your DNS is resolving over HDNS. which is just feeding from a handshake node somewhere. So there's all these different connections or means in on-ramping into resolving handshake names, which makes it universally compatible. So I can have it embedded at the router level. I can have it embedded at the operating system level on my computer. I can have it embedded on like the local, like, certificate and etc. VPN on my device. I can use a light client and resolve from someone else's node and have it as just like a little toolbar application on my device. Like, handshake can be dropped in anywhere, universal name anywhere, that creates a system with its own economies of scale on top of it. So again, it's an internet of internets that removes many of the middlemen that the existing web depend on, and removes all that margin and all that financial overhead, and brings all that value down to the person that can then take all that inherent value and then expand outward and create their basically, their own universally branded internet.
How long do you think before it's able to work across platform?
Well, it already is.
Where it becomes just kind of, just as standard as the other methodology.
Yeah. So like, if you've ever used a VPN or anything like that, like, going in and like changing some DNS settings or something like that, it's like something you've either done, or maybe you just flip the switch on, but you would get the general gist there. Like, you going from resolving over the existing web now to handshake, that takes some steps to the point where it's already enabled by default by, say, like Brave browser. Then when you type in .com, then it would resolve over .com. But when you type in .Josh Terry, then it knows to hit a handshake node because it's indexed, and it knows to go and resolve that over like handshake. Like, when and then so there's browsers already that are compatible with handshake and do that. Which is great. And so at that point, it's just like, as handshake is already incentivized to be embedded into different services, which we'll get in that, I guess, maybe in a little bit. Like, by nature, the system itself like rewards people to like adopt it. And so like that carries through like multiple different layers above whoever owns the name.
So it's already happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we have a system that allows us to create websites that both we maintain more complete control over, and other people have more control over their ability to access it. It's attaching to a system that's already in place, and it's adding value. It's not subtracting value. It's just adding extra available names at a cheaper rate, lower cost.
Yeah.
I think a lot these days about the billions of people that are about to come online, and I think a lot about how bad humans are at perceiving exponents. Mm-hmm. And there are right now, .com, .io, .club, etc., a lot of domains, and when we look at them, we think of them as a lot, thousands or whatever. But when you think about the billions of people coming online, and the fact that every time a person comes online, it doesn't have a linear effect on the internet. It has some level of exponential effect on the internet. The absolute need for freedom to establish your own identity, piece of digital real estate, a place that is yours, I think it's going to blow up in a way that is almost incomprehensible.
I would agree. What happens when China and everyone else there can all access the same internet we are, and be on our new decentralized version of Twitter and Facebook, and reach like, real-time scale. And that can be indexed, and that sentiment can be analyzed, and anyone can do anything they want with that data, and people are getting paid to opt into things. They own their keys. They're signing them with their handshake names. They're storing data on like CS, like Skynet. They're storing information on Filecoin, IPFS. They're doing compute over decentralized protocols like a cache, and which is essentially like a decentralized like AWS. So you got a spare computer sitting around with a spare CPU.
cool, let somebody access it from the cloud and like do some computation. Like now, like idle hardware doesn't really exist in this new world, in this new internet, because there's so much activity.
We need it all.
You're gonna need to utilize that. Yeah, we need all of it. So like therein is a whole other incentive of itself. All these people get online, it just naturally wants to scale itself. So if you give people dangle a carrot of it, free and accessible universal information and value, they'll figure out a way to do it. And that goes back to that point there, you know what I mean? Like it's an evolving system, it's emergent, it's just in time, and you know, we're gonna be all right.
Yes.
We've always been.
Going back to the infrastructure idea, it's like the infrastructure that we have right now to the average person for the internet seems completely fine, because hey, we have internet, it works, you know, well, for the people that it does work for. But the effect of the number of people that are about to have internet access it's so absurdly big. I mean, you just can't wrap your head around that. It's too big that, you know, I don't think we can know what could come out of that. The infrastructure that we have right now, I think, is possibly laughable to operate a actual World Wide Web, like a fully World Wide Web.
I mean, the concept of World Wide Web was always kind of a misnomer anyway, because like it's kind of a web. There's a lot of there's a really big
there's a web and there's a world.
There's infrastructure in place to do this. A lot of this shit still runs over copper wire and a bunch of like garbage infrastructure. Mostly, a lot of the world is connected, but they're not as connected as you are. It might not be as real time. Hell, I think AOL still has like 3 million customers. So I mean, like, there's people on the internet, but they're not on the internet. And in the same regard, a lot of people, and I don't think people think about this that often, but at least here in the West, people have smartphones, but not all of them have unlimited internet on their devices. So, and the extra data that they would have to pay for is expensive. And when they do that, they're not going to spend their time learning about obscure internet technologies. They're going to do it to check their fucking bank balance. And they're going to do that to, like, literally maybe hop on some like dating apps or like update their Facebook or Twitter, like, because that's like, you know what I mean? So it's like, as the world comes online, but if we can decentralize these infrastructures, we can get them more online, so to speak, faster. Yes. Where they're like ingesting like HD media, they're all like they're listening to like real time video and like podcasts, and you know, they're on these apps, and they can like be competitive online and not just like paying to play or and have to choose incentive wise like what's good for them long term. I'm not gonna sit here and download ebooks, or I'm gonna like hang out on Twitter and feel like a normal teenager for a little bit. You know what I mean? Like that has to change. Too.
Yeah, this idea of just, you know, having more domain names available, just that. To me, it seems sort of like almost like a what do you call it? A blow off valve for what we currently have. Where
literally, I think we're just like kind of puncturing a little hole inside of the Capri Sun box, and we're like, all right, we're gonna let this drain out a little bit. And so that it doesn't like explode.
Because are you really going to fit all of the billions of people and all of their collective creativity and ideology, you know, into the current system? I think that's once again an experiment I don't want to see running. So the idea of a blow-off valve that allows people to, you know, fully explore and having your own website doesn't seem to, I think, to a lot of people as important as it might have once at one time, because social media became so big, right? And we got so used to having our identities on a social platform that's centralized. But I mean, as a person who has his own website, and like I've done experiments on my own website that made me think about the world differently, because I just had this one little place that made me think, oh, I have my own little piece of real estate. I can explore an idea my way. And
Yeah, exactly. Having a place that's yours without being able to get deplatformed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah. The deplatforming is a whole nother thing that ties into what we were talking about earlier about the firewall. Um,
mm,
yeah, but the just the like, I mean, I'm not even super, I'm not super techie in the sense that I'm not going around doing a lot of experiments in this space.
mm,
And for me, I came to that realization, right? I was working on website. I came to that realization where I thought, wow, like this gives me a little bit of independence that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And
mhm,
when you think of billions of people coming online, and then millions of them being tech inclined in some way, shape, or form, for you
mhm,
to raise the likelihood that one of them would simply come to that conclusion, it
mhm,
is an absurd ROI, because it means
mhm,
that somebody, one of millions, comes up with ideas that they wouldn't have had otherwise, where they develop apps, their own social media networks, their own ideas in ways that they wouldn't
mhm.
otherwise. It creates room for variation. I think that's what it pops in. That's what pops into my mind.
Yeah, that's why I just like using that simple metaphor, just the internet of internets. You know what I mean? Like everyone, depending on how popular you want to be, becomes your own little Facebook on the internet, right? And it all goes back to that very simple 512 bytes that exists on that tree space for you when you own that name. And you might own 10, 20, 30. Some people have like 6,000 names. You know what I mean? They're really hedging on this stuff. Like one of my buddies, Ryan Ramirez, he messaged me on Twitter one day, and he was like, "Hey, how do I get on this handshake thing?" And I was like, "Well, go here, do this." And he happened to buy .NFT, and he's just
Oh,
like young 20-something-year-old dude. Yeah, and then he sold .NFT for
I would
$84,000.
imagine so.
Yeah, and then he doubled down and put like in for him that's like life-changing
Yeah,
money, right? And it was a huge opportunity to get from like paying, I think it was just a couple thousand handshake maybe for the name in total. So at the time, maybe like 100 something bucks, 200, $300 to turn that into $84,000. That's pretty dope.
yeah,
That's someone's entire like IT related like band salary.
yeah. The whole web
And
domain real estate boom is going to be fascinating to watch.
I mean, you can value a name. You can create whatever marketing perceive around it. Create something from nothing. Now you've got this seed money, say $84,000, and then you take a portion of that because someone was smart and said put a bit of that in Handshake, please, and you did, and then Handshake 10x's. So then now you got your $10,000 you put in there, and now you got like now you got a hundred grand. You know what I mean? And they're like, well, wow, that was easy. And it's like you get a little bit of freedom. It's very easy to make money. And once you have that money, it's very easy to keep making it again. If you continue to be like conservative and resourceful, and when you have the internet at your palm of your hands and can access that value creation with anybody and it not be censored, that's huge. Like there's multiple different layers that come beyond Handshake again, like storage and like other decentralized VPN services. There's other ways that your Handshake name like resolved and things like that can be like more private and more secure. And Handshake as a protocol, will continue to evolve and adapt. And there's exchanges that have like now they're also name registrars, so they're like these exchange registrars where you can like become a part of the new D-Web while also like spending your Bitcoin or Ethereum or something like that and acquiring Handshake. And so there's all this new opportunity for centralized exchanges to break into the internet game with very low barrier to entry, and be able to be a part of this like new web. So I'm excited to see also even where the incumbents go, because if they bring that wealth and that engineering talent and stuff like that in a Handshake, like Namecheap, for instance, Namecheap claimed their 2.7 million something odd Handshake that was set aside for them in the protocol, because there was a Handshake that was set aside at its inception, in the Genesis block that dictated that if these existing internet giants basically did a handshake with the Handshake network, and basically prove their keys of like their ownership of their names that they own on the Icann network, then they would get their handshake. Well, for Namecheap and them claiming .Namecheap, they got 2.7 million handshake. So boom, Teddy Worcester, the CTO, really awesome dude. Been talking to him quite often. Their CEO, their company, 2.7 million handshake richer, and at the time, I think it was valued at like almost $2 million, and now it's valued at like probably like almost $3 million bucks. So, that's a lot of money to get for free, but there's a lot of other companies just like Namecheap that have it set aside in protocol as well for them to claim that. So there's this gamified incentive to adopt Handshake, get your free bag, get your free Handshake name, and that pays for the cost of integration or at least learning about it. And as the price of Handshake goes up, those incentives just increase. So there was a portion of Handshake that was set aside for open source developers too. So your keys were essentially like farmed from like GitHub. And then your keys can then be used to verify and send a message to the Handshake network that says, hey, I would like to claim my pre-set aside assets. Do you have anything for me? So once your keys are verified with the network, and then you would get your Handshake in return for that. And it was like some 4,200 something Handshake, and that's worth about 3,500 bucks or something like that right now. And so that's pretty epic.
So if you're a developer, you might have access to it right now.
Absolutely. If you're on GitHub and you had like your SSH keys and etc. on GitHub, those were farmed. And so all your public keys, so you would essentially do a handshake with the network with your private keys, and then that would allow you to get your handshake, which is really dope. So we're trying to do what we did with gifting all those handshake names, but by doing the same so with the developers, because you want custodians of the network over time that understand the protocol intimately, can explain it, can write materials, resources, contribute back to the protocol in a code base. Maybe you know even more about DNS, and you have other means and different services and protocols that you can build to work alongside Handshake. Some other plugin that can work inside and utilize that 512 byte space. Some layer 2 technologies, maybe something email related, etc. You at least have a little skin in the game when you come into it. And as the price of Handshake increases, you're going to have, that's a good day. It could potentially just be like the seed money for your new, D-Web related venture. That's exciting. And Handshake incentivizes all of that through its innate construction, and it was very intelligently designed by some people that I respect very much. So I had some inputs rather here and there, during smaller discussions with Joseph Poon, but all the mechanisms and etc. that make Handshake function, that's the brilliance of JJ, Christopher Jeffrey, who wrote the majority of the code base. Boima, who worked alongside them with the launch, Andrew Lee, and again Joseph Poon, who did a lot of kind of the game theory around the asset and etc. and how the launch would go, and that that's not to include myself, my friends who built the mining GPU implementation that would work for AMD and NVIDIA, so that we could get those early enthusiasts from both sides, because you don't want to centralize to just one of the GPU makers, something that many people don't really kind of understand when they're going to launch an asset. But then the asset was designed, it means that it was ASIC friendly, and it means that that to protect it against some of the pitfalls that Bitcoin faced with what's called ASIC boost, where they would take advantage of the reserve root in Bitcoin, they would malleate that, and then they use that as an optimization inside the ASIC hardware itself to find blocks faster. And so that's just something that's just a unique quirk of Bitcoin's proof of work that no one will ever touch or change, right? So if you're a company that knew about that a while ago, you centralized around that unique optimization. And that was the early company was Bitmain. And so there's a reason why certain miners are more prolific than others. And so if you're going to build a decentralized system, you want those stakeholders to be decentralized in the beginning. And so with Handshake and its proof of work construction, which was iterated on a few times, it eventually became what it is now, which is Blake 2B SHA-3, which is you hash all your chain information in data, the root and all the transactions in a block, and then you run it through Blake 2B, and then you run it through SHA-3, and then you run it through Blake 2B again, and then that is the loop, that the hash loop that is the proof of work. So in Bitcoin, it's double SHA 256. So it takes all the information for the block, etc., hash it like SHA 256, hash it SHA 256, and then that find that unique like hash, and like you're good and you can solve your block. Awesome. But with Handshake, we had 9-10 years of additional history of looking at Bitcoin, and JJ particularly, who's probably seen the Bitcoin blockchain think more times than anyone on planet Earth, because he was one of the first to re-implement it from its C++ implementation into Node.js. So if you've ever written programming code and you've ever seen C versus like JavaScript is far more human readable, like just like reading through it line by line and understanding what it's doing, versus something like C that has multiple different components because of optimization reasons, and like calls out the certain instructions and structs in different manner. And so that you might not be familiar with if you're not a C developer. And so for Bitcoin, for the longest time, it was very esoteric. It was very, proprietary to those particular types of C++ developers that intuitively really understood C++, so then they could really understand Bitcoin and why it was built and constructed in different manners in which it was. Why was it big endian here? Why is it this number of bytes there? Like, why was it ECDSA chosen? Like, why, like, like all these things that you had to know so much implicit knowledge about the web, the infrastructure of the internet, like how programming works, like how whatever, like distributed systems work, to know why Satoshi built those things in which he did and how he did it. And so JJ having to re-implement all that into a different language, learn all those quirks themselves, those bugs even that he found, and he's even broken Bitcoin on a few times and has been at the Breaking Bitcoin conference and did a live presentation of himself breaking Bitcoin, which actually made a lot of people mad. And it's like, he's like, but the whole point of the damn conference is breaking Bitcoin. So I broke it. And here's how you would do it. And then like they went through a series of like, a process to development wise to like get that bug fixed and eventually like released on the network. But for a while that really scared people. And so, we also showed the importance of having a human readable implementation, having a design spec to it that is human readable and simple, not like, if you ever looked at the Ethereum yellow paper on how Ethereum works, like that's a barrier to entry. Like that takes like a PhD level distributed systems, like, math and mathematician or whatever to be able to understand what Ethereum is doing to re-implement in another language. However, if the implementation is the reference and the reference is human readable, i.e. it's in Node.js, like HSD is, the handshake daemon, then if you're going to re-implement it into something like C, or if we're going to re-implement it in C++ itself, it's much easier to work backwards from the plain, like basically it's like, doing the exam by having the answer key. It's all there in front of you. It's like very well documented. Standard notes, this is why I use this here, this is why I did this there. Like that's great. And that's actually really important to having multiple implementations. When you have multiple implementations in different languages, different developers speak different languages literally, and how they think about programming. When things are built from the web, you don't have to worry as much about like resources as when you're building something in an embedded system and you're writing it in C and it's going to run on an alarm clock or a smartphone. You're a whole different type of programmer when you're worrying about those bits and like flipping bits and stuff. Like it's like rocket science shit at that point versus ta-da, I built a web page. Like there's a huge difference between those two things. So if you have a language by design that is met in the middle, like JavaScript, which is why it's so popular online, it's because it does enough. You can do a lot. You can and you can build a proof of concept, and you can do that and make something that is web native. It's going to run, on most people's web browsers, and that's great. And that's a larger scale than saying I'm going to build something on Android and I'm going to build that natively, and I'm going to learn how to all the quirks of the Android operating system, but also of the devices that frequently are built with the Android operating system. And so now I want to understand, okay, I'm going to build an app for AR, VR kits. Well, I need to understand what GPU are these damn things running? Like, what is this particular chipset? What is this clock speed? Like, what am I working with here as far as like actual like components? That's a whole different level. And so more abstractions, you can get away from that. You can create a generalized framework, like something like Node.js, something that people are familiar with NPM, they're familiar with that. They can see it for what Handshake is, and then that more than likely contribute to the network. And again, there's an art to it, to all these things on top of these like business sciences. And it's like being able to communicate these things to people, having the right people that can have these high level discussions and these low level discussions, be able to speak to developers, be able to speak to people, be able to build and implement these things, and etc. Like it's a lot of altruism too, because if you don't care about the money and you're building something that's going to make a lot of people money, you're going to have to really get rid of your ego fast, because you're just going to otherwise be salty that now you've built this $100 million, billion-dollar network, but you only ever garnered a couple thousand, maybe dollars of value of that creation. And that's the other hard part of building a blockchain, is like making sure one person is not outsized greedy and doesn't get a large portion of the early distribution. Which you can't really pay people to not want to. It takes just a special type of person, a group of people with a certain type of incentives. And I think a lot of the people early in Handshake, which you can list forever, they saw this as an opportunity to right a lot of the things that Bitcoin missed out on, but also to provide a level of flexibility and to invite a lot of people to the table that otherwise maybe wouldn't have. So when Handshake raised money privately of the 1.34 billion that was set aside at the network's inception, and the max supply for Handshake is 2.04 billion, so at least about 600 something odd thousand that's available for mining. The preset amount for all the developers, it's already preset. The preset amount for all the companies, that's preset amount for the early project creators, and then also these VCs. So these VCs had 100 million Handshake divided amongst all of them. They raised $10.2 million, and that $10.2 million was given away to a slew of different open source organizations. So it was part of the whole like launching Handshake fairly and etc. And like not kind of also working as like this commodity, like getting away from these securities rules and like how the asset was launched. Then a lot of people were incentivized not only through the chain to build on it, but now these open source organizations got a mixed bag of this $10.2 million that they never were expecting. There was no obligation for them to ever do anything with it. It was a free gift. And it was like, hey, when the time comes, remember Handshake. Basically, you help build the modern web in an open source format, we're going to give you guys this money. So, people like Founders Fund, Kinetic Capital, My Fund, Momentum Capital, huge names in the angel world, came on board to support Handshake, to get a tiny piece of that very small allotment, where the outsized holders of it from the get-go are all developers or existing companies on the web, or a company even in the Alexa top 100,000. Those got Handshake too. A lot of them just got 503 Handshake that are just there forever. So if you own a random website and you're in the Alexa top 100,000, there's a 99% chance that you have Handshake set aside for you, and all you need to do is go through this name claim process and get your free Handshake. And 503 Handshake right now is about like $370, $380, something like that. So Handshake's like 70 something cent right now. And so that's nothing to shake a stick at. That's some good money. So I think a lot of people should really think about going forward when they look into crypto assets, especially new ones that aren't proof of work, because proof of stake has its own, launching that from the offset. Proof of stake is, you really have to be focused on distribution early on for something like that to work long term. But as far as proof of work goes, make sure there's at this time an application specific need for that blockchain. It needs to be technically, semantically different enough that it offers something new that the world didn't already have. And if you're going to create an entire economy of scale and create a hardware-based system where people are building wafers and running data centers to run these miners, it better be to secure something useful. You know what I mean? Because we live in a world where we're trying to be green. So if you don't create bullshit just to short-term make money, that long-term is going to have a net negative on the environment. And blockchains by nature themselves incentivize green energy because it's a chase every 10 minutes to produce a hash that's compatible for that network to, get that proof of work reward. But you're thinking about your overhead, your expenditures, you're thinking about your energy, you're trying to get it from the cheapest place, you're trying to build your hardware from the cheapest, manufacturer that's going to produce it in the most simplistic means. And then now the network is getting more difficult. So individuals are constantly making reinvestments into like these different companies that like have like different like their own economy of scale incentives, and they have their own regulatory connections, and like everything is all connected to eventually have the cheapest block reward produced as far as like costs. And so that's why most of the mining right now happens in China, is because there's a lot of cheap hydroelectric power there, a lot of like green related like energies. So the cost to create a Bitcoin, if you have those connections, can be much cheaper if you have like that's this green energy. So if you're going to compete in the West, which we're trying to now with Biden, and his like sort of like silicon, focus expansion and getting all these different companies to start building chips here in the U.S. to compete against China, because right now we have to import all our chips. And since we have all this data infrastructure that needs more and more, integrity, all the way down to the hardware level, we got to create a lot of that stuff here in the United States. And so to compete with that, we've got to start building, chips and this hardware and these miners and stuff for Handshake, Bitcoin, for Ethereum, as long as that's still relevant as far as like proof of work. And, and we have to do that at scale. And the net positive of that is it makes our national security that much greater. So there's there's an incentive there for like the Department of Defense. And so, it's all connected, but it's just in time, and it'll work, and it's working, and there's no way we lose at this point. I mean, all we got to do is just like keep the gas on the brakes, keep the gas on the accelerator, and don't hit the brakes.
I love it. This is fascinating. All right, well, I'm going to have to come close this chapter. A last question for you, and this is sort of just a summary fun thing. Take it where you like. Where do you see, in terms of like, what do you think are some of the more fun, exciting things that are going to happen in the next 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, like since we've gotten very capitalized, Bitcoin and crypto's collective market caps in the multiple trillions, there's a lot of liquidity and a lot of capital on the sidelines for more experimentation with what can you do with collective peer-to-peer incentives at scale, right? There's a lot of problems to solve in relation to pollution. There's a lot of problems to solve in relation to solar, being able to like get people paid, to produce these solar panel arrays, to have them housed in their own home, give them an incentive to figure out how to install them in their own place, give them an incentive to be able to create their own little microgrids amongst each other to, balance out the existing grids to create more points, resilient points of redundancy exist from centralized infrastructure. We'll see that. And then, now we're going to get paid for data that we get because we need oracles. Well, what if I want to know what the mineral content is of this random farm in Arizona? Well, what if I paid someone to run a sensor for that, and then now I've got these stakes in the ground that get me paid as a farmer, then I'm going to use this money that otherwise wouldn't have gotten passively, and I reinvested in growing like my homestead. Like it goes down to like fixing Ponzi schemes that even run off the backs of farmers, right? Like there's so much value created off of like cocoa. But imagine if you could get a token in the hands of a bunch of cocoa farmers in like South America and you made them millionaires. Don't you think they would cut those contracts that otherwise are feeding you poison every day much sooner? Absolutely. So it's just like get the right people paid and you fix a lot of shit. And I think of public blockchains, protocols, again, as hot fixes for the real world, because that's really what they are. And when they're well built, they work. And then they're going to work in perpetuity as long as people need them.
The future is an exciting place.
Right? I think so too. I think it's going to be dope.
Where would you like to send people?
I guess if you're interested in Handshake and what I was talking about, you can go to learnhns.com and you can learn about it there. There's a Handshake related weekly newsletter called The Shake on Substack. So just theshake.substack.com you can go to get a weekly update of everything that's new with that. Other than that, just pay attention to the deep web and all those interconnected, like, stacks and pieces, and, make long-term investments that make sense, that are interoperable with each other, but mostly are secure from a technical standpoint, but also from a social governance standpoint. Be careful what you put your money into. And at the end of the day, if the people who are selling you things cannot tell you intimately about the technical design of something, but they're so adamant about the financial return of it, question their integrity. You know what I mean? How can you sell someone something that you don't understand? Even when you go in the Apple store and you ask somebody about an Apple iPhone, that representative can tell you about that iPhone, show you how to install, set up your iCloud, install apps, you can do all that together. You meet a salesman, they're going to know the product. So if you meet a crypto salesman that doesn't know the product, don't buy the shit they're selling.
Fantastic. Thanks, man.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me on.